Operation Popeye. Leave the climate change to us professionals. In the jungles of Vietnam, an enigmatic phenomenon unfolded. As unprecedented strings, as, it doesn't say as, an unprecedented string of rainy seasons during a tumultuous period. Unbeknownst to many, there was more to these peculiar weather patterns than meets the eye. Excuse me. Although it is always wet in the jungles of Vietnam, there were several years in the late 1960s and early 1970s that were marked by unusual rainy seasons. Periods of strange weather where clouds seemed to suddenly gather, fill with rain, and burst, drenching those beneath them. The United States was in the midst of a war with North Vietnam. The U.S. troops had occasion to notice that the wet weather seemed to sometimes favor their operations. They would be having a difficult time stopping the Viet Cong from using a particular bridge or road to transport troops and supplies that they later used to stage attacks on U.S. forces. Then the rain would start, and within a couple of days the road would have been washed away or the bridge rendered impassable and damaged beyond repair. While bridges and roads were vital for armies to win wars, there were other, less visible essentials as well. Someone raised on a farm probably would have noticed that the strange weather also hindered the North Vietnamese in another way. Farmers plant their crops at just the right time of year to ensure that they will get the right amount of rain and warm or cool weather to mature into well-formed, usable food. But when weather becomes unpredictable, like when rainy seasons continue for much longer than usual during periods of drought, crops often fail. They might wither up and dry from a lack of water, or turn yellow and wilted if the ground is too wet. The excessive rain caused many Vietnamese farmers to lose entire crops, food that was going to be used to supply the army and the rest of Vietnam with much needed food in the future. Some American soldiers thought the strange weather was providence, a sign that they were favored, that even Mother Nature was conspiring to help them win the war. Some thought it was just good luck, and some cursed the constant rain and wished it would stop, welcoming a chance to finally dry out, even if the enemy got a break from the drizzle as well. Finally, about the time the last U.S. plane headed for home, the weather resumed its natural cycle, and the soggy years came to an end. Things aren't always what they seem. Modern technology has given man and governments the ability to control things that have previously been out of their reach. Armies once had to march wherever they wanted to go. Later, through technological advances, they were able to use chariots, then wagons and trains, trucks, tanks, and airplanes. Some battlefields are now reached remotely, and the battles fought with drones. But the one thing all armies across all time have had to deal with was the weather. Weather impacts the good guys and the bad guys just the same. You can't control the weather, or can you? In 1967, the United States military launched a top-secret operation known as Operation Popeye. The goal of the operation was to extend the monsoon season in areas of Laos and Vietnam that were vulnerable to seasonal flooding. To do this, planes flew through clouds and dropped silver iodide particles into the atmosphere that caused rainfall and disrupted normal air currents. Popeye was first reported in 1966 by Dr. Leonard Sullivan, Assistant Director for Defense Research and Engineering. He came up with the idea after reading about how cloud seeding had been used to induce rainfall in arid regions in the United States. Sullivan believed that if cloud seeding could be used to cause rain, it could also be used to extend the monsoon season. Sullivan's superior, Dr. John Forrester, liked the proposal and got approval from Defense Secretary Robert McNamara for Popeye to go ahead. From 1967 to 1972, planes flew over Laos and Vietnam, dropping silver iodide into the atmosphere. The U.S. military personnel carried out cloud seeding missions using a converted C-130 transport plane. The crew would fly into an existing storm and then ignite the canisters of silver iodide to release particle-rich smoke and cause a reaction. Popeye had a significant impact on the Vietnam War. Prior to the operation, communist forces were able to freely move supplies and troops during the dry season. However, after Popeye began, they were forced to slow down due to heavy rains and flooding. This gave the United States an advantage in battle as they were able to launch surprise attacks on enemy forces. The military's goal with the program was to extend the monsoon season for 30 to 45 days, as well as increase the amount of rainfall during storms. After reporters began publicizing what the government was doing, shining a light on the program and its impacts on the Vietnamese people, Popeye was eventually discontinued in 1972. No one was ever held responsible for the damage caused to the environment or the unethical nature of the project. Despite the controversy surrounding Popeye, cloud seeding continues to be used for various purposes today. In fact, it is now commonly used by ski resorts in order to produce artificial snowfall, by event venues to guarantee sunny wedding days, and by farmers in order to increase crop yields. Cui bono? The U.S. military discovered that weather manipulation was actually possible, and they set their new technology to work to help them get the upper hand in their fight against the Viet Cong army. By extending the rainy season through cloud seeding operations, the U.S. was able to turn Mother Nature against their enemy. Bridges washed away, roads were impassable for weeks or months, and the enemy was cold, wet, and demoralized, looking at the sky, wondering how much longer the rain could possibly fall. But the earth has its cycles for a reason, and it turns out blocking the sun and causing constant rain impacts more than just the roads, bridges, and the morale of the enemy. Soon, crops began to fail, not just the crops of enemy fighters, but the crops of regular people who were just trying to survive as their country was ravaged by war. The drinking water was contaminated, illness spread, livestock died, and people began to worry that they wouldn't be able to feed their families or care for their children anymore. Who decided that the people of Vietnam had to be the test subjects for the United States' new weather control technology? Who had the authority to make that decision? And was that person to be trusted to think about all the possible outcomes and consequences of their actions? Was there any accountability if what they did caused harm to innocent people? The truth is, there was no accountability, and few people knew or cared that innocent people were suffering and dying in the never-ending storms artificially enhanced to win a war that ultimately couldn't be won. Why does this matter? The technology used to control and manipulate weather wasn't simply put away after the end of the Vietnam War. Although it was still in its early stages, it had proven to be a useful tool, one that could certainly be refined and expanded upon for future use. The same is true for many technologies and products developed for war. They don't simply get placed on a shelf or stuck in a storage closet after they've served their purpose. Many technologies were first tested in war and later developed for everyday use and application. For example, the company that developed Agent Orange, a pesticide sprayed by U.S. forces in Vietnam, which caused millions of deaths and permanent disabilities in both the people of Vietnam and U.S. service members. is now one of the biggest agricultural manufacturers in the world. Monsanto develops seed technologies, and their pesticides and fertilizers are sprayed on nearly a quarter of all farmland in the world. They made a lot of their early money by selling the toxic Agent Orange to the US government and used the research done on human test subjects, the Vietnamese people and US troops, to develop later technologies. As world leaders shift their focus to climate change and seek new ways to mitigate what they believe are dangerous impacts on weather, it would be naive to forget that decades ago, governments knew they could spray particles into the sky and cause the weather to do what they wanted it to do what they wanted it to. For example, in late 2022, it was revealed that the White House had begun implementing a 5-year research program into climate interventions, which included activities such as having planes spray reflective particles at very high altitudes to try and block incoming sunlight to slow down climate change. It is unlikely that powerful people who want to change the way we live have forgotten that weather manipulation technology exists, or that it has remained in storage since the end of the Vietnam War. Quite the opposite, really. Such technology is still seen as viable by many today. What we learned. Number 1, technology that allows the manipulation of weather has been available since at least the 1960s. Number 2, government agencies, military leaders, and scientists will all work together to meet their immediate goals without caring that the things they are doing impact everyone, including innocent people. 3, the government and media will conspire to disparage those who question what they see with their own eyes by labeling them conspiracy theorists. This label discourages other people from questioning official narratives because they don't want to be likewise labeled. Weather modification in North Vietnam and Laos. Memorandum from the Deputy Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs to the Secretary of State, January 13, 1967. The Department of Defense has requested our approval to initiate the operational phase of Project Popeye in selected areas along the infiltration routes in North Vietnam and southern Laos. The objective of this program is to produce sufficient rainfall along these lines of communication to interdict or at least interfere with truck traffic between North and South Vietnam. Recently, improved cloud seeding techniques would be applied. Recently improved cloud seeding techniques would be applied on a sustained basis in a non-publicized effort to induce continued rainfall through the months of the normal dry season. A test phase of Project Popeye was approved by state and defense and conducted during October 1966 in a strip of the Lao Panhandle, generally east of the Bolovins Plateau. Bolovins Plateau in the valley of Sekong River. The test was conducted without consultation. It's getting dark. This page is also darker than the rest of the other ones. Slightly. Maybe it's just the font. No, it's a little gray. And I'm a little dyslexic. Sorry. Okay, I start again. The test was conducted without consultation with Lao authorities, but with Ambassador Sullivan's knowledge and concurrence, and to the best of our knowledge, remains unknown to other than a severely limited number of U.S. officials. During the test phase, more than 50 cloud seeding experiments were conducted. The results are viewed by DoD as outstandingly successful. In our view, the experiments were undeniably successful, indicating that, at least under weather and terrain conditions such as those involved, the U.S. government has realized a capability and significance. All right, I'm going to start over. In our view, the experiments were undeniably successful, indicating that, at least under weather and terrain conditions such as those involved, the U.S. government has realized a capability of significant weather modification. If anything, these tests were too successful. Neither the volume of induced rainfall nor the extent of area affected can be precisely predicted, and the only absolute control, therefore, is after the fact, i.e., to halt cloud seeding missions. The present DoD proposal would grant authority for the conduct of cloud seeding activities on a sustained basis. For designated areas in North Vietnam, it would mean taking advantage of the present northeast monsoon, the Kratchin, to increase normal rainfall. I mean no disrespect mispronouncing these words. My apologies if that's offensive to anybody. The objective is to inhibit overland vehicular movement and to reinforce the bottlenecks already created at stream crossings by the bombing of bridges and ferry installations. With respect to Laos, the objective is to extend rainfall through the dry season, which began in November and continues through April or May, keeping the ground as near the saturation point as possible and obstructing traffic that normally fords streams during the low water period. A corollary phase of the operation would be to conduct intensified weather reconnaissance and additional experiments in weather modification over international waters in the South China Sea from Philippine bases, one principal objective being the development of techniques to dissipate cloud cover as well as to induce abnormal rainfall. The impact on civilian population would be much the same in kind with greater in degree than that discussed below with respect to areas outside the target zone. The psychological impact will be perhaps greater than any other effect, particularly when conditions characteristic of the rainy season are unexpected. Tuttle twins, true conspiracies. I like each topic is broken up in the same kind of way. You get the cover story, things aren't always what they seem, and then what you learned. Oh no, cui bono, what you learned, and then the proof in the end. So I'm gonna do another one of these tomorrow. I'm gonna go through the book, but I felt like this one was pretty important. Because check out what happens after your sky starts looking like this through, what happens. Think about it. Look into it. I've been talking about this since I was in my 20s. So a lot of years. And it's nice to see it being talked about. My thoughts and prayers are with North Carolina, parts of Florida.